"You're not supposed to be here, Thiago," I muttered, clutching the shirt in my hands, my voice betraying a mixture of irritation and something I dared not name. Thiago stood frozen in the doorway, his expression shifting between surprise and an apologetic grin. "Sorry, I didn't know," he began, his voice faltering as he quickly turned his back to me, his tall frame nearly blocking the entire doorway. I pulled the shirt over my head hastily, heat rushing to my face. The door was closed for a reason. "Yeah, my bad," Thiago said, already stepping out, his tone light but hurried. He didn't wait for me to say more, and a second later, the door clicked shut. For a moment, I stood motionless, my heart pounding harder than it should have. It wasn't just the embarrassment of being caught shirtless, or worse, the fact that it was Thiago who had seen me. It was the way I caught a fleeting glance of his face, a mixture of confusion and something else. I swallowed hard, shaking my head. This has to stop, I thought. The house had felt heavier ever since Thiago returned home for the holidays. His presence, once easygoing and carefree, now carried an unsettling weight for me. He wasn't a child anymore. At 21, he'd grown into a man, confident, charismatic, and completely at ease in his skin. His mother, Isabel, often joked that Thiago could charm his way out of a traffic ticket. But Isabel didn't see what I saw. Or maybe she did, and she chose to ignore it. She had her own way of ignoring things, like the fact that our marriage had been limping along for years, more a partnership of convenience than passion. I sighed, folding my discarded clothes and placing them neatly on the bed. The room felt stifling now, every corner echoing the awkwardness of the encounter. Thiago's return had been unexpected, and Isabel had welcomed him with open arms, thrilled to have her son home after months away. For me, though, his presence was a mixed blessing. I enjoyed his company. Who wouldn't? He was polite, funny, and had an energy that made even the dullest day seem brighter. But I also found myself hyper-aware of his every move, every word. It was wrong, and I knew it. But emotions don't follow rules, and mine had been running wild ever since Thiago's arrival. The first evening he came back, he'd sat across from me at dinner, recounting his latest adventures at college. Isabel listened intently, her laugh bubbling up at every punchline, but I could barely focus on his words. All I could see was the way his hands moved as he spoke, the curve of his smile, the way he leaned forward, completely unguarded. "You've been quiet," Thiago had said, catching me off guard. "Everything okay, Matt?" I blinked, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just tired. Long day." "Don't let him fool you," Isabel teased, waving her fork in my direction. "Matt works hard, but he's always got energy for dessert." The conversation moved on, but I couldn't shake the way Thiago had looked at me, curious, almost concerned. The incident in the bedroom replayed in my mind as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. Thiago hadn't meant to walk in. He'd been careless, sure, but there was no malice or intent behind it. If anything, he looked more embarrassed than I felt. But it wasn't just the act of him walking in. It was what it revealed about me. About the thoughts I'd been suppressing for weeks. Thoughts I couldn't afford to entertain. I needed distance, but that was impossible in this house. Thiago was everywhere. His laughter ringing down the hall, his cologne lingering in the living room, his presence filling every space he occupied. By the time I left the bedroom and ventured into the kitchen, Isabel was busy making tea. She glanced up at me, her dark eyes narrowing slightly. "You okay? You've been quiet all evening." "Just tired," I said automatically, grabbing a glass of water. She studied me for a moment longer, then shrugged. "Thiago said he might head out tomorrow to see some friends. I thought we could spend the day together. Just the two of us." I nodded, forcing a smile. "That sounds nice." Inside, I felt a flicker of relief. A day without Thiago around might be exactly what I needed to reset my thoughts and remind myself of my place in this family. Later that night, as I lay in bed beside Isabel, I stared at the ceiling, my mind refusing to settle. The memory of Thiago standing in the doorway lingered, vivid and sharp. His voice, his posture, the way he'd avoided looking directly at me after the initial glance. It all played on a loop, drawing me further into a spiral I didn't know how to escape. I closed my eyes, willing sleep to come. But even in the quiet darkness, I couldn't stop thinking about him. And I hated myself for it. Tomorrow will be better, I told myself. It has to be. The memory of Thiago standing in the doorway lingered like a stain on my conscience. No matter how hard I tried to scrub it away, it clung, vivid and persistent. That fleeting moment replayed endlessly in my mind. The startled look in his eyes, the awkward apology, and the lingering question of what he must have thought. I kept my distance the next morning, remaining in my office long after I heard the front door close, signaling that Thiago had left to meet his friends. It was supposed to be a relief, a reprieve from the tension I'd been carrying since the incident. Instead, it felt like avoidance. Isabel had left shortly after him, a casual kiss on my cheek and a quick reminder to join her for dinner that evening. Alone in the house, I wandered aimlessly, the silence amplifying my thoughts. Sitting in the living room, I stared at a photo on the mantel, a family snapshot from last Christmas. Thiago, in a festive sweater Isabel had forced him to wear, had his arms slung casually around my shoulders. I remembered how I'd laughed at his jokes that evening, feeling warm and at ease in his presence. How had it all shifted so dramatically? I shook my head, dragging myself back to the present. This wasn't who I was. I loved Isabel. I respected Thiago. But the more I tried to rationalize, the more I felt trapped in a web of emotions I couldn't untangle. By mid-afternoon, Thiago returned. His laughter filled the house as he spoke on the phone, his voice casual and unbothered. I sat stiffly at the kitchen table, pretending to focus on my laptop as he entered, ending his call. "Hey," he greeted, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. His tone was relaxed, but there was something in his demeanor, subtle, almost imperceptible. He avoided meeting my eyes for too long, his movements slightly too quick. "Hey," I replied, my voice strained despite my effort to sound normal. An awkward silence hung between us, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. He leaned against the counter, tapping his fingers on the bottle. "About yesterday," he began, his tone careful. "I didn't mean to, It's fine," I cut in quickly, too quickly. "Really? Let's just forget about it." He nodded, but his gaze lingered on me for a moment longer, as though he was about to say something else. Instead, he offered a faint smile and left the room, leaving me with my racing thoughts. The days that followed were no better. Thiago seemed to sense the tension, his usual ease replaced by a careful politeness. He was never rude, but the warmth in his demeanor felt muted, as though he was holding something back. On the other hand, struggled to maintain my composure. Every shared glance, every accidental brush of his hand as we passed in the hallway, sent my heart into overdrive. I hated myself for it, hated how my feelings had turned something innocent into something fraught with meaning. One evening, Isabel suggested a family movie night. Thiago chose a light-hearted comedy, and for a while, it seemed like things might return to normal. We laughed together, the tension momentarily forgotten. But then, during a quiet scene, Thiago glanced at me. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it held a weight that sent my mind spiraling. I couldn't decipher it. Was it curiosity, concern, or something else entirely? When the movie ended, Isabel excused herself, leaving Thiago and me to clean up the living room. The air felt thick, every movement charged with unspoken words. As I picked up the empty popcorn bowl, Thiago finally broke the silence. "You've been different lately?" I froze, the bowl suddenly feeling too heavy in my hands. "Different? How so?" He shrugged, his expression carefully neutral. "I don't know. Quieter. Distant. I've just been busy," I said, avoiding his gaze. "Is that all?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. I turned to face him, meeting his eyes for the first time in what felt like days. "What are you trying to say, Thiago?" His brow furrowed, and for a moment he looked like he might answer. But then he shook his head, offering a small smile. "Nothing. Forget it." That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the conversation over and over. What had he meant? Was he genuinely concerned? Or was he picking up on something I wasn't ready to admit out loud? The uncertainty gnawed at me, keeping sleep at bay. For the first time, I considered that Thiago might not be as oblivious as I'd assumed. And that thought terrified me. The house was quiet again, Isabel away for the weekend visiting her sister. Thiago and I were alone. I busied myself with the usual distractions, answering emails, tidying the kitchen. But no amount of tasks could dull the tension simmering beneath the surface. By evening, Thiago wandered into the living room, his hair damp from a shower. He wore a faded gray hoodie and sweatpants, casual and unassuming, but my eyes lingered too long. He noticed. "Everything okay?" he asked, a slight tilt of his head. "Fine," I replied quickly, forcing my gaze to my laptop. "You sure?" Thiago walked closer, his expression tinged with concern. "You've been off lately. You don't seem like yourself." I took a deep breath, setting the laptop aside. "I guess I've just had a lot on my mind." "Like what?" His voice was calm, but his curiosity felt like a spotlight, exposing the cracks I'd been trying to hide. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I wasn't supposed to say anything. But the weight of it all, the guilt, the longing, the endless self-recrimination, broke something inside me. "I think I've made things uncomfortable between us," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Thiago's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, my hands gripping the edge of the couch. "That day, when you walked in on me, it's not your fault, but it stirred up feelings I'm not proud of. And I've been struggling to figure out how to handle them." His eyes widened slightly, but he didn't move. "Feelings?" I nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "I know it's wrong. I know it's unfair to you, to Isabel, to everyone. But I need you to know that I'm working on it, that I'm trying to put it behind me." For a moment, the silence was unbearable. Then Thiago exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't have to say anything," I said quickly. "I just needed to be honest. You've always been kind and respectful, and I didn't want my behavior to make you feel otherwise." Thiago took a step back, leaning against the wall. His expression softened, and he nodded slowly. "I respect that, Matt, and I appreciate you telling me. But I think you're being too hard on yourself." I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "Look, I'm not pretending to understand everything you're feeling," he said carefully. "But I know you. You're a good man, even if you don't believe it right now. And yeah, this is complicated, but I think it says a lot that you're trying to deal with it instead of letting it fester." His words were both a balm and a blade, cutting through my self-loathing while exposing just how much I had to face. The conversation shifted after that, veering towards safer topics. Thiago stayed for a while, talking about his plans for the future, his friends, and the classes he was excited about next semester. I listened, grateful for the normalcy, even as my chest ached with the knowledge of what I had to do. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. I thought about Isabel, about our marriage, about the years we'd spent building a life together. I thought about Thiago, his warmth, his kindness, his ability to forgive me even when I couldn't forgive myself. And I realized that the only way forward was to let go, not just of the feelings I had for Thiago, but of the version of myself that had allowed them to take root. When Isabel returned the next day, I greeted her with a renewed determination. We talked, really talked for the first time in months. I admitted to feeling distant, to losing sight of the things that mattered. She listened, her expression a mix of surprise and relief. "It's not too late to fix this," she said, her hand resting over mine. Her words were a lifeline, and I clung to them. Over the following weeks, I made changes. Small at first, spending more time with Isabel, being honest about my feelings, focusing on the life we'd built together. Thiago remained in the picture, of course, but the dynamic shifted. The boundaries became clearer, the interactions less fraught. I still thought about that moment, about the vulnerability it had forced me to confront. But instead of shame, I felt gratitude for Thiago's maturity, for Isabel's patience, and for the chance to be better. The story is a reminder that we are all capable of feeling things we wish we didn't, but our actions define us more than our emotions. Confronting those feelings with honesty and accountability is difficult, but it's the only path to growth and redemption. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is stepping back and choosing what's right for everyone involved.